Hey everyone, this is Todd M. Casey and welcome to the Shop Talk Podcast, aka the ToddCast. I'll be sharing unscripted interviews with artists in their studio as well as conversations that I have with other artists. This week I had the pleasure of talking with Leo Mancini-Hresko about many things, so here's their interview. I hope you enjoy. Yeah, well, I guess go for what are you working on?
Well, I have a couple things going right now. I'm trying to get a painting out the door that's finished. I'm just waiting to varnish it for the Bryan Gallery's 40th anniversary show, which is kind of fun. It's got a lot of the painters you like in it. Like they have a bunch of Aldro Hibbard's work and Groupie and Lester Stevens, I think, in it. It's like a real historic show also, so I'm really pleased to have this thing out the door for that. I think that opens in May, and then I'm finishing another kind of mid-sized picture for the Rockport Art Association. That one's almost done for their first summer show next week, and then there's that painting that that got into the Lime Hudson Valley show that I have to deliver next month. So yeah, it's kind of busy, but I'm also finishing a little self-portrait.
And you're in the show with at Ray's, right? The Philadelphia museum show, right?
Yeah, I mean that thing's awesome. Like I felt a bit of it's on like two levels because that's where my whole father's side of the family's from. So that's like the first opportunity for some of my cousins and aunts and uncles to just, go right in their own backyard and see my stuff. And then, it's at the Philly Museum. That's like, I've just had the Rocky theme playing in my head for the past couple days.
That's awesome.
Imagining my paintings being carried up those stairs.
Are you going down to hang with the family and see it?
I talked about it. We're just too busy. I mean, there's so much going on at home. My kids have birthday parties that they're attending and stuff. And it's, the nice thing about working with Rays is that they travel with the work and that I don't have to travel, but I really, that's one I sort of wish I was there for to see folks.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I a very blue collar family here, and from Lowell, Massachusetts, and I always get kind of giddy when I show at the Whistler House in Lowell, Massachusetts, because I'm like, finally my family can come see it. I mean, granted, my mom and dad will kind of go anywhere to see me and my art, but my sister gets to see it, my nieces get to see it, my cousins come sometime to the show. It's pretty awesome, isn't it? Like when you can kind of get the family involved.
Yeah, and the Whistler House is also like an awesome collection, not just for James Abbott McNeill Whistler, but like it's got one of the very best Aldro Hibbard paintings. Speaking of him, like that picture that they have there is incredible.
That's what got me really into art. I mean, my entrance into art was Hibbard, into the oil part of it. I remember just going to the Whistler House, and seeing like their collection. They had like 4 or 5 of them, and I think they got more in the back. And they're just so thick and juicy. I mean, I think that's one of the big overlaps that you and I have between the love, and one of the reasons why when you're always trying to convince me to go out and do landscape painting with you, I'm like, I could try to finally paint some snow like Hibbard did,
Yeah, he really is the master of coloring in snow. He's just so creative, the different choices he makes with how to sort of key things down that you wouldn't expect, making the mountains a really deep purple color so that he can achieve all of these really silvery opalescent colors in the snow. He's an interesting person to study because he's an example of taking that kind of Boston school training that he got, out of French Impressionism and out of the academic, 19th century Paris kind of ethos, and he just ran with it and did his own thing. I find it so impressive. He's he's become more of a hero over the years as I've tried to like figure out how to do almost directional hatch mark making and painting, like really broken brush stuff. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've seen the Rockport Art Association's new auction this year, they have a couple. They have a groupie and a couple hybrids that are just super interesting because they're fresh, but they're also just every stroke is there's a river scene, and almost every stroke is indicative of the movement of the water, which is just such a hard thing to do, right? Like a single brushstroke would ruin the effect.
Yeah, man. When I went to Greater Lowell in Tingsboro, Massachusetts, vocational school, and every year, right before we broke for summer, our the art department would always take us to Rockport, and I remember it's the other part of seeing Hibbard, because they have a fantastic collection up there as well, and Rockport's just such a romantic place. I mean, you painted there many times, right, with Stape and TM and all that. Right?
I'm like, yeah, I feel very connected to the place, even though like I'm not really a Rockport painter. I like the stuff, I like the history, and it's full of my friends, and there's a lot of shared ethic there. It's an amazing place, but it's gotten better. I think it's gotten significantly better in the past few years. Behind the scenes, there was a lot of, decisions being made with the place, and the artists kind of took back a lot of control over what the vision of the Rockport Artists Association would be, and there's just been this influx of really exciting membership. Like 2 days ago I was busy, I couldn't go, but like Don Demers was there doing a demo. My buddy Stape Kearns opened a new gallery right next door. It just feels like, yeah, it's been this artist tourist town, but there's a lot of very serious, very dedicated painters that are becoming rededicated to Rockport. So I don't know, it's the first thing I ever joined. So I guess I'm at least partially Rockport now, but I don't know. It's a strange thing. How about
awesome.
you? What are you working on?
It's so funny. I'm always so all over the place. I think I'm known for still life paintings, but every time you and I get together, I'm like, hey, I'm doing a palette knife painting, or I dabble in watercolor, I sculpt. I don't know, and then having a kid, as I'm sure you got two of them, it just pulls you somewhere else where you're, playing with colored pencils again and creating characters out of my head. Right now, right?
Yeah.
It's so much fun, and I always go and I think about like how eclectic I am with my music, and I'm like, that's about how eclectic I am with my art. But what people see is the polished kind of still life painter, maybe that I'm portrayed as. But then there's a part of me that's like, if I see a path and I'm walking down the road and I'm like, it looks interesting, I'm going to go play with it for a while. And sometimes it's just going to the museums, seeing something. So I had seen, I think it was a Child Hassam landscape, and it looked very, very loose, and it was just gorgeous. And it's one of the things that inspired me to start doing kind of palette knife painting, because I always get asked, like, what do you use this medium? Mediums are always like, as a teacher, like the question, right? Like, what mediums do you use and what brushes do you use? And I'm always like, I don't use much of any of them. Like, I sometimes paint with one brush, and I don't particularly use a lot of medium. But then I'm like, well, I have all this medium. Maybe I'll tinker with it. So I do the coal wax landscape paintings from photography. And we were probably both taught not to paint from photography.
Absolutely.
Which I understand. Right, and I understand it. And then at the same time, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go paint from it now, so I have my own perspective on it. But it really just affords me to play with mediums and play with paint and come from the expressionist side. So I'm sending two palette knife paintings up to Bryan Gallery. That's our overlap.
Oh, nice.
I think you were the one that introduced me to them. And two watercolors. So they're all like sky scenes from photos that I took over the years. But again, it's just being able to play and then see if there's a place for it after, and just keep staying a kid. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's just fun. It's more fun to be creative. I mean, so you didn't send them any still lifes? You just sent them, landscapes and watercolors? That's awesome.
I had two still lifes up there, and I think that was the show that you had suggested I submit for, and I did, and I got a couple in. And then the relationship started, and they were like, "We love your work," and we're opening up, I think, the Stowe, right? Because they got the Stowe in the Jeffersonville locations. And they wanted to put 2 paintings over there, and I said, that's fine, you can hold on to them, because the show ended. And then I had palette knife paintings in a different show. And sometimes just throwing stuff up on the wall and see what sticks, but that stuff I'm still creating. So then I was like, it doesn't seem like there's a big market for still life up there. I don't quite know. I haven't been there. You know a lot more than I do, because you do the group in Jeffersonville and paint. But I thought, maybe I could send you more palette knife stuff. And they said, yeah, we'd love it. And we'll send some of the still life back to you. And as you know, it's kind of like, that's the thing, is like, how do you rotate paintings in and out of galleries? How much time do you give them if they're not moving your work? I want to be a part of the gallery, because I think you and I are both I think you're very, very excited about it, and I'm excited about it. But it seems like that gallery is really, really going to be something special. You would agree with that, right?
Well, it was a really interesting moment, because I think that historically there was something like 21 galleries in Stowe. And then in the spring, basically a year ago, and like Stowe's it's a really interesting place in Vermont. Most of Vermont is really sleepy, rural, and kind of bucolic and working, hard working, hard graft kind of areas. But Stowe, because of the mountain having been bought out by Vail a few years ago, I mean, real estate has just gone nuts. Lots of new construction. And normally when new walls are going up, galleries do well, because new homes, people are shopping for new things to hang on their new walls. But instead, I think it was like, instead of 21 galleries, I think it actually went down to 0. And basically there was one other gallery in town where a friend of mine showed his work, and they reopened with new ownership. And then about a month or so later, the Bryan reopened in a great spot on Main Street. They opened their space in Stowe, which is, the Bryan Gallery it's not like other galleries. It's a, it's a 501c3 nonprofit, so it's an educational resource. They hold events. It is, it was a big risk for them to take on this new space, but it's been, so far, I think it's been doing really well for a new, I mean, and Stowe's just kind of a special place. There's nowhere else you can find as much traffic, foot traffic, restaurants. I mean, just go on down the list. So I saw yesterday the sponsorship for some of the upcoming events, and it's literally got like the best breweries, the place that sort of invented the New England IPA that is the newest, craziest beer style. Like, they're sponsoring it. It's just really, it's been fun to watch it evolve, and I hope it continues to do well. Kind of exciting, and I'm glad that gives you an outlet for something different, because painting's no fun if you're just making products. I think it's much more about like a creative process, and sometimes you create stuff that is like exciting. What the heck do I even do with this thing? So it makes sense that we all have like slightly different outlets for slightly different work. And I don't know, it helps you develop. I'm not even sure if the work that I'm doing right now, if 15 years ago, if I would have even liked the paintings that I do now. They're so different than I used to do. And instead of that making me worried, I just love that. Like, I love that it's bringing me places, and I'm exploring as I go. Like, that's the creative part. It's really fun.
Yeah, there's a quote by Van Gogh I say a lot to my students, and he said, normalcy is a paved road, but no flowers grow on it. And I feel like a good way to kind of be creative all the time is to push yourself. Like, go down that road where you're just not quite sure, right? And then we have like an Emerson quote, and he says, once the mind has been has accepted a new idea, or the mind has been molded to a new idea, it can't go back to where it was. So it's kind of like, the beautiful part of that is that the journey, right? That you're taking the risks. I'm taking the risks. I don't know what palette knife painting's going to take me. I don't know what watercolors are going to take me, or if there's even a connection between the character designs that I do with my daughter when we're just scribbling. But then I do like a little character turnaround sheet, and then I did a sculpture of Mr. Incredible. And sometimes I'm like, maybe that could be a prop that I put in my painting, because that then paints something that I'm interested in. And for me, I'm always like, how can I weave all these interests open?
Yeah.
Or keep the interest always open and weave them together.
Do you know what the ship of Theseus is? You ever heard of that?
I haven't. You always school me with something good, so.
No, I have all this. Sorry, it's not. It sounds like really lofty, but it's really just like my wife is Greek, so I just know some Greek stuff by osmosis because I spend a lot of time over there. But basically, the ship of Theseus is an old philosophical paradox. It goes back, I think, to antiquity. Although I could be wrong. Like maybe it's AD, maybe it's Roman. But the ship of Theseus is a thought experiment where Theseus has a ship which goes out to sea, and it's gone for many years, and it weathers many storms, and across the ocean, seas, and lands that this ship travels slowly, bit by bit, the sails are replaced, the rigging is replaced, the nails rust out and have to be replaced. The decking, each board breaks or rots, each barrel, each seat. I mean, you go down the line, and eventually, over the course of the trip, every single part of the ship has been replaced. The ship comes back to its original harbor, and the paradoxical question is the ship of Theseus the same ship or a new ship? And it's like a perfect example of life, and especially in artistic life, that we're this like amalgam of different achievements and moments and movements, and it's so much about this journey, and we come back very different than we start out, I think.
Oh yeah, and I think even Lewis Carroll has the quote in Alice in Wonderland, and he said, Alice is talking to somebody at the end of the book. And it's like, I don't want to go back to yesterday because I'm not the same person, Like, it's just this ever evolving, I think, idea. Now, it's not to say that that's for everybody, because I think I've seen plenty of artists that kind of hit their stride, find their love, and then do the same paintings for the next 30 years. But I don't know, part of me, the creative process is this ever evolving person or thing. I'm sure you do this, right? You look back at your paintings from like Florence Academy, or even just 10 years or 5 years ago, and I go, wow, I am just not that person anymore. I don't even think I could do it. And when I heard an interview with Bob Dylan, who was talking about some of those early songs that are like the Bob Dylan ones, the lyrics that he wrote, he's like, I don't even think I could write that anymore, because he's not that person anymore.
Yeah. No, I mean, and not just that, some of the paintings that I did that I was proud of, I don't really see anything in. And some things that I didn't see much in, I look back on and I'm like, oh, that's actually really interesting. Like, we just have such a warped, maybe profoundly warped view of our own work. And, when I'm teaching, I'm always talking to students about, like, using a fresh eye, trying to be as naive as possible, trying to view it like it's someone else's painting. But at the end of the day, like, I don't think any of us are entirely in the driver's seat or able to see or decide when an achievement is what it is. Like, I can sort of feel certain paintings like, wow, I wouldn't have been able to do that previously. But I also look back behind me and I look at paintings and I go, I know I couldn't do that right now. Mm-hmm.
Seems like some of our earlier things that we were after too were probably more technical, right? I think it's like,
definitely,
like, as students we're just like, I just want to make stuff look like stuff, And now I'm like I get asked all the time, because I wrote the color of the book on color, and everyone
it's kind of
thinks
the
I'm like,
book on color, isn't it? It's kind of become.
I don't know. It could be. Hopefully not, because people think that I can answer all color questions, and I'm like, and I want to make it clear, I am not like a scientist isn't going to read my book and be amazed. It's more of how to use color to solve a problem in painting, and that's where I'm like, that's all I care about. It doesn't have to fit into all the models across the board. But a lot of the time I get asked, like, how do you get that color exact? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't go for exact color. And then I feel like I just took my key out and took the shackles off their hands, because somebody has been telling them that it's all about nailing the color and getting it perfect. And I'm like, that makes me, it seems like that's going to lead to, like, why not just get a device then if you're trying to get it exact? I mean, Home Depot will do it for you if you want to bring them a paint chip and they'll match it. Is that what we're going with it? Is that what painting is? Yeah. And you have that awesome quote that you throw out by Stape, right?
Oh, I don't know. Which one is that?
When somebody asked him something like, is that the color that you see? And he's like, no, that's the color that
God, this is great. This is great. No, I got to do it. So I run these workshops for other people. Like, you've come to my studio and taught with me a couple times, and I have all these great folks that come through. And there's these repeating patterns. Like you said, what kind of brush do you use? What colors are on your palette? What's your magic medium? These just get repeated over and over and over. And there are kind of gotcha questions that happen. And these gotcha questions pop up here and there. And one that has always sort of stuck out to me in landscape classes, and I mean, some of the people that come through and have been asked this question are real heavy hitters. These are people that really know what they're doing. But a student will raise their hand as they're painting the sky and say, excuse me, is that the color that you see the sky? Sort of indicating that it looks off to them somehow, or why did you mix it that way, and what colors are in it? And like everybody, myself included, always kind of sidesteps that question. They'll be like, well, yeah, I mean, you have to think about the dome of the sky and the quantity of humidity. So really, I'm creating a gradient. There's this long sort of winded reply. And Stape Kearns, who, is definitely my senior, and he's just got a lot of experience. He's taught 1 million workshops. He turned to the student that asked that question and said, so concisely, he goes, what color I see it? No. It's the color I want it to be. Mm-hmm. And it was like this mic drop moment for teaching when he taught that class. I was like, wow, that really is what it comes down to, that putting something down with conviction because you plan it as such is superior to just the endless being a slave to nature searching. Because something that's put down, even if it's put down and it's quote unquote incorrect, if it's put down with conviction, it looks more correct than something that's really, very rethought and revisited and fussed with, and there's just a difference there. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but it's such a good story. I had no idea. Stape he's got a lot of stories. You're gonna have to talk to him at some point.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you went into it, actually. I think it's just one of those things that I these days I've been just asking my students, like, what is your vision? Like, what do you want to say with this? Like, if once you learn how to play the instrument, what do you want to say? And I think those are things that, like, I know when I was at Water Street, I wasn't even thinking about that stuff. We were just kind of myopically in there trying to, like, render what we saw up in front of us, and with no idea that there's, like, you're learning how to make an instrument that can play in a symphony, and what is the music that you want,
But that's not the goal at that point. I mean, the goal is to just try to, within the aesthetics of that teacher, school approach, whatever, to try to, as faithfully as possible, represent what's in front of you. But I think a lot of people don't realize when they're in a school, they're just learning one aesthetic interpretation, right? Like, it's truth exists in many different ways in painting. And there's this concept of, like, tactile truth, like painting surface and really trying to paint, like a tactile, almost like a topography of subject. And then there's trying to paint light as subject and how light responds to the form rather than how the form is responding to light, if that makes sense. One being a lot more constructive, the other being a lot more optical, and I think really good painters are often doing a bit of both, like it's like a right brain, left brain kind of concept.
Yeah, it's something I just did an article for Artist Magazine called The Optical and the Conceptual, and I think about it,
perfect.
or you could even say optical perceptual versus constructive conceptual, because even coming from an animation background, which is what I did my master's in, we were just all about construction. It was like we weren't doing these like 72-hour pose figures or long pose. For us, 20 minutes was a long time. And in that time, you weren't like trying to get things exact. You were pushing gesture and thinking of the structure and generally getting it. But the end result for this was to go towards animation, to move the figure, to be able to draw it so much that you understand how to draw it out of your head. That's something I would say atelier training doesn't particularly talk about all that much, even though back in the day, the old masters could do a lot of that stuff. But I think it's just much more optical copying going on these days, and it's not trying to be pejorative with it. But I like that synthesis between the two, that I can construct a character with my daughter and then be like, maybe I'll sculpt this thing and make it realistic now,
Yeah, I spend my days drawing a lot of unicorns, and I joked with a friend of mine that the most painting I had done one weekend was painting my daughter's fingernails. But that, the time spent doing that stuff, I don't know, it's like, even though I spend less hours at the easel than I used to, I'm so much more efficient at the easel, and I find, it's really fun just sitting around and like drawing superheroes with my son and drawing, Fortnite characters with him now. He's super into Fortnite. It's, I don't know. It's still all very creative. But yeah, that optical way of working to me is, I don't know. It's really important because, a lot of people, you brought up photography before, and I think a lot of people kind of obsess over, does it look finished? It looks just like a photo. Like, photography became this like center of truth, whereas that's a fairly modern concept in painting. And I was looking at like early platinum print collodion photography, and frankly, those look painterly. They look like paintings. They don't look like photos. And at the end of the day, it's just about aesthetics. Like I don't, it's almost like a magic trick. Like, people want to stand at their exhibition and somebody says, well, that looks just like a photo. And then they say, well, I'll have you know, sir, I didn't use any photography. I did that all with by myself, and everybody's going to clap. If the aesthetics are such that it looks just like a photo, it's still photo related, whether the photo is used or not. It's
what we related to.
Yeah, it's become this blanket term. So I'm always much more interested in telling somebody that their photograph looks just like a painting.
That's awesome. It's funny. There's a quote by Whistler, and he said, "If the ultimate job was to make it look like a photo, then the ultimate artist would be a photographer." Did you ever hear that quote?
Yeah, he was just so brilliant. I gotta say, like, Whistler.
Whistler.
Yeah, because Lowell. There you go. Whistler's such an amazing American artist character, not just because of his paintings, which are very famous, his prints, which are like universally regarded. And if you haven't ever read the Joseph Pennell book, who's one of Whistler's students, it's just like the most interesting art commentary of that time. But not just the etchings, which are, fabulous, and people rank him near Rembrandt in that regard. No, it's like his writing and commentary on art is so I mean, he just eviscerated people, and The Gentle Art of Making Enemies is a book I've recommended to everybody. It's just one of the most fun pieces of art reading, and so much of the 20th century kind of art commentary comes out of some of the stuff he writes in there.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Awesome.
I love him. I think he's way, way, way underrated today.
It's funny because Lowell, Massachusetts is where he was born and raised, I think, for 4 or 5 years. And now the museum is there that has preserved that home. But I didn't know much about him until I think I was in college. And then I started to look into it and being like, oh, wow, he's from Lowell, Mass. And then I went back and looked at the Hibbards and stuff like that. Because I would see the Hibbards up at Rockport, but sometimes these gems are like in your backyard, and it's like, oh my gosh, Whistler was from Lowell? And then you find out Kerouac was from Lowell, and there's just like little trails of things that you can kind of go in and begin to research. But definitely a pivotal figure in so much. I mean, the Impressionists were he kind of created tonalism, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was
modern tonalism. He
was willing to stand up and call people out on stuff and be rude, frankly. Like, he wasn't, I don't think he was well liked by everybody. You know, he's got both the letters that he writes to Sargent that are very complimentary, and then the letters he writes about Sargent where he's just like eviscerating him, calling the paintings, I think, profane. But yeah, I think he's sort of a role model, not necessarily for me, but for so many. You know, like the thing that that he said in the trial, where, you know, he had taken what's his name, Ruskin, to court for what do you call it, for
defamation, right?
Defamation of character, and because you know, he had written a horrible review of a painting that he said it looked like he had just smudged it out in 5 minutes, you know. And he admits basically that he did it quickly, but he asked to be paid not for how many minutes he worked on the painting, but the amount of years that it took him to achieve the skills to do that. And I mean, that really is what births the concepts around like abstract expressionism, Picasso, like you go all the way down the list. Whistler was just a really early adopter of that line of thinking, that art wasn't a artisanal craft to be paid for by square inch or by quantity. No, you are paying because it is a Whistler, because it is a Todd Casey. Like, it really is the same thing that you're talking about, where it's not just, you know, is it a 6x8? Is it a 12x16? No, they want it because it's yours, you know.
Individual.
I like that concept. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, he definitely. I mean, he got kicked out of West Point too, right? He was kind of everywhere he went, he kind of wreaked havoc.
Yeah, I mean, he started training at West Point. I think J. Alden Weir's father maybe was his teacher. So there's this really interesting connection with the Weir family, because Weir, who was like, you know, you read those 19th century studio Paris books, and everybody loved J. Alden Weir. It seems like he's just like the most well-regarded person. But Weir was like super against Impressionism. When he was in Paris, wrote these letters back to the States to his father about how, you know, how the mighty have fallen, blah, blah, blah. And it's within like 2 years of moving back to the States, he's doing very Whistlerian, very tonalist work. So, yeah, there's an interesting connection there.
Here's a weird connection for me. I live about a mile from Weir Farm. Isn't that weird?
I taught there years ago. It's a great spot for painting, actually.
It's amazing. But, like,
yeah.
I don't know. We're talking about Whistler and Weir. And I kind of was, like, they're in my backyard. You know, like, now Weir is in my backyard. And I'm like, I go there all the time. I drive by it anytime I can. I drive through it.
That's
like,
funny.
It's a beautiful place, but...
I didn't realize you were that close to it, actually. It's weird, man. Like, when I moved to Italy, I was only 18, and I was just so taken with all the art and culture. I thought that we were in like a cultural backwater in America, that we couldn't, nobody could teach you to paint anymore. Turns out, like, this was just pre-internet. As close as I was to this stuff, I couldn't find it. But I moved back to the States, and I mean, we have, especially New England, is just such a rich cultural history of painting. It really, yeah, it's been incredible to sort of like submerge myself into that since moving back and figure out what things were here that I totally, I just wasn't even aware of.
Same here. I mean, having gone to school at Mass Art in Boston, and then just understanding, you go through like Copley Square, and you just see all these names and stuff, and you don't put the two and two together. And then you see like John Singleton Copley, and then like you go in the library, and you're like, there's Sargent murals here, and we never talked about any of this stuff in art history class,
This thing that you're talking about, Copley Square, there's another piece to this that I only found out like 3 years ago. Copley Square is called Copley Square, and that library was built to be a cultural art center for the city of Boston. So if you stand your back at the library, if you look out to the right where that kind of medieval designed hotel is, that's the original Museum of Fine Arts building. If you instead look to the left corner where there's this like where the 7-Eleven was when I was a kid, it's just got like some apartments there now. That was the original art studio building where Joseph DeCamp, where it burned down and he lost everything. So Copley Square, where like I drank my first 40 ounce and puked on the sidewalk and skateboarded with my friends, was the cultural capital of Boston. And yeah, I mean, that's the reason it's there. But it took me time to piece this together because it's just not talked about. Like, not to cut you off, but nobody knows this today.
Well, Abbey too. The Quest for the Holy Grail, that room. It's just funny because you walk through it and there's the grandness of the library. And then you walk through the rooms and you're like, wait a minute, did I just walk by a Sargent? Now, what's weird about stuff like that is like you go to the MFA and you go see the Sargent show and you walk in a room and you can't move, right? I'm sure you went and saw the fashion Sargent show.
Few times.
Amazing. Good. But it's like you walk by and there's always people around Sargent. Abbey, they have the King Lear at the Met. They have a few beautiful Abbeys at the Yale Art Museum. I think the largest collection of Abbey drawings too. But then you go in and everybody's just kind of walking by it. And it's like, it just begs the question of like, what is, like, they're just not aware that art is around them all the time. And only when you go to a museum is when you pay attention to it.
Yeah. It's the difference between seeing art and being able to say that you have seen art, right? Like that, what was that guy's name? The Mona Lisa Curse, that film, the Australian art critic. He was at the New Yorker for years and years and years. I'm blanking on his name right now, but it's like he outlines this point in history where people started wanting to have seen art rather than, the process
of see it. Yeah.
Going and seeing it.
Well, that happened with me with the Mona Lisa too when I went to the Louvre. And Gina and I were walking around. The Louvre is massive. We walked around for like an hour and a half. We were just like blown away. And we kind of looked at the map and I'm like, we're not even like an eighth of the way through this thing. And I said, all right, let's go see the Mona Lisa. And you kind of go down that super long corridor past, what is it? The Winged Victory or whatever it is on the stairs.
The Nike of Samothrace.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
No, that's one of the best presented artworks on the planet. I mean, it's like
right there on the stairs.
It's amazing.
So I'm walking down that hallway and I'm like, I got to get, I'm tired now. I'm like 2 hours in. I'm like, I just got to pick a couple more things to try to see. And I'm like rushing to go see the Mona Lisa. And then I'm like, wait a minute. There's like 5 like Da Vinci's. I just walked by and I stopped because I saw the line for the Mona Lisa, under glass, and you have to stand 20 feet behind. And then I'm like, wait a minute, how did everybody walk by all these Da Vinci's? And I went back and I was like, I don't even want to see the Mona Lisa now. I can spend time with nobody around, and they're all going to look at that one painting.
Yeah.
And then
and
I
the
stopped and looked
Madonna on the Rocks is like right there, right outside, and nobody's standing in front of it.
It's amazing, though. And that's, a lot of the things, like as a teacher, especially when I was teaching at Mass Art, I would take my students over to the MFA and say, all right, here's what I want you to do. Here's an exercise. Walk into the center of a room. Don't look at the names. Don't try to recognize anything. Hopefully you're in a room where you don't recognize something. And then let your heart reel you into the painting. And then go study it and don't look at the name. And take it in that way. Because there's too much of this, like, I got to go see the Monet or the Mona Lisa. And I think that's why the Impressionists get such a bad rap. Because, they sell so well. They sell the tickets to get into museums. But I'm like, no, I love Monet, and if nobody's in a room, I'm going to go study a Monet. But if I go over to into the section of the museum where there's 400 people, I'm not looking at the Monet. I'm not getting in line,
Yep.
And 9 times out of 10, like at the Met, I'm like, nobody is ever looking at the Font and Latours with the Impressionists, and I'm the only one all the way over there like, how are you all walking by not seeing this thing?
Yeah.
They're gorgeous.
And Fontaine, he's... he wouldn't have really had a career if not for Whistler. Whistler really helped the guy out. He helped him sell so many paintings, but just, to circle back to Whistler, but like what you're talking about is so much in that movie. The guy's name's Robert Hughes. That's his name. He's an Australian, New York art critic, and this guy was like a total champion of like the abstract expressionist movement. What's his name? Robert Rauschenberg. He like loved his stuff. So it's not as if he's not like a super traditional. This guy was an avant-garde art critic, but he recognized that this precise issue, that the public was willing to walk past greater paintings to say they have seen the Mona Lisa, to buy the mug, to buy the T-shirt, to have the commodity experience and not actually the cultural experience.
Yeah, it's so crazy to me, but I get it. I mean, look, we've all probably done it too, where we're just like, we're here, I got to go see the Caravaggio. I'm sure you did a lot when you were in Italy, but then at the same time, it's like stopping to kind of smell the roses. It's almost like if you were to go to a botanical garden, and then it's like you just walk by all the flowers that are in bloom in your yard, and they're all there, but now they're framed in this dimension of botanical garden. And now you only pay attention to them,
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, these days when I go to the museum, I mean, we sort of did this together when we saw the Manet Degas show at the Met.
So good. So many people there.
It's a great show, but like, to be honest, I'm good for like 40 minutes, something like that. Like, I would rather have like a really deep experience with just a few paintings. Then, and we surveyed it quickly. It's a great show. I'm so glad we went through everything. But even though we went fairly fast, like when I go to the museum alone, I really like going through quickly and sort of zeroing in on a thing or two.
That's exactly what I do.
It's just less noisy, Like I need quiet in my mind to really. Because when you look at a painting, it's like you're trying to figure out how it's built. I'm looking at the surface and imagining the medium and what, I can't turn off the analytical part of my brain. So I want to appreciate those few things that I really connect with rather than like forcing a connection.
I totally agree. That's what I do too. I usually kind of run through, not run literally, but walk through to see... to take it in as a whole, almost like a storybook, like a kid's storybook. And then I'm like, all right, I'm going to go back to page 6. There's something there. And I want to just study it and take a look at it. But not even know, just kind of go experience it and then set the seed, almost like rhetorically asking questions that will lay the groundwork for thought, to kind of place around in my studio. And a lot of the time I'll even buy that postcard of something randomly, if I can get it, to put on my wall and then let it through osmosis come through in the work. Not do a version of the painting, which I see a lot of people do. I mean, I think Instagram and Facebook and a lot of the social media end up, they end up being these almost like content farms for people to pull from. They find not inspiration from, but they do versions of other people's paintings. But for me, I'm like, no, I'd rather put together a postcard wall of like 50 paintings and let all of that come together, all 50 pieces. Frankenstein it,
What do people call that? Like a vision board or something?
We did it all the time at Ralph Lauren when I worked there. I worked at graphic designer and saw the rig rooms, and we always started with a wall, which was a narrative way to work. And it was swatches, it was photos, it was pictures, lifestyle pictures. It's selling the whole concept. And then from there was the story came out of it. The clothes were designed into it. I think
Were there
sometimes...
any, pictures of 1990s ravers?
They weren't, very Ralph Lauren clothes are never really there. But the boys, we did get a little edgy at times. And I remember pulling some like Ramones and some cool rock and roll kind of stuff for a while. That's when like my director was like, "Hey, have fun with this," and I was like, "Really? All right, here we go." And then and then I would just go off, and I would come back with these boards of like what you pulled, and then it was his job just to be like, "That's awesome that you're here, and now let's bring it back a little bit." So he'd let you go off the beaten path and then reel you back in. And then from there, I would present it to the director of the boys' team. And then if it made it there, I would design into that idea and give him like 20 or 30 ideas. And then they would pare it down into like the merchandising coming in and being like, well, yeah, we could sell that. Or this is a novelty item,
Yeah. I mean, that's like a creative process. But I wasn't joking about the 90s raver thing. It's like a funny thing about Ralph Lauren polo stuff that it had this like...
Oh, the Lowheads too.
Exactly. Like the street culture appeal. Like I knew graffiti writers that exclusively wore polo. The 90s kind of rave scene in America was very polo heavy. Like Wu-Tang is very polo. It's like...
Yeah, there's subcultures.
Kind of funny, man. Yeah,
they have subcultures. They didn't understand it until about 5 or 7 years ago. And then they began to do things with, I think, Supreme, where they were doing all these like, one-offs, or not one-off, but like very low-run novelty items. And really comes from Wu-Tang was a big part of it. Kanye was a big part of it too. But Wu-Tang had that, Raekwon the Chef is rocking the snow polo, which I'm like, what the hell is snow polo? But he had the snow polo jacket, and you would know it, man. It's the yellow, cadmium yellow medium looking jacket with a green pocket.
Cadmium yellow medium.
Yeah, with a green pocket. And it's just so random. But it's one of the most collected jackets, and they didn't know it for the longest time that's who was buying their stuff. And lowheads would hit me up on Instagram because they knew that I was connected to Ralph and they wanted to see what I was doing.
Oh my god, that's so funny.
Yeah, but it's definitely cool because I don't think like Ralph Lauren knew at the time, but then they saw that there was a market for that and they're like, why not design into it? And now they're doing all this throwback stuff to polo jeans and all, stuff from like the 90s, pulling it all back. Kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I have no idea if sometimes people respond to stuff better unconsciously than when it's like, something that people are trying to do. I have a really close friend of mine I grew up with was at Supreme for years and years and years, and it was just like super interesting watching him. He's a designer. He ran one of the design departments or something. But yeah, it was just like fascinating watching this turn slowly from being like a skateboard and t-shirt company to, he gave me a just like a box logo Supreme shirt for my like kid, and he gave me like a purple one that I gave to my nephew, and I was like, oh, it's sweet. Like my nephew, at the time he was 17 or something. And anyway, after I gave it to him, I looked it up, and it was like a limited run. This purple thing was for like a music video with some rap group like 3 6 Mafia. It was worth like thousands of dollars, and I just gave it to a teenager. It was really like, it was just a weird thing to watch happen, and I think, yeah, I mean, they've done everything from like, mocha pot coffee makers to shovels to polo to, yeah, it's very strange how, if I stayed doing in this world of graffiti and skateboarding and stuff, those things actually probably are much more successful and probably have a lot more of a market behind them than oil paintings do. But oil paintings it's just fulfilling on a totally different level. It's like being part of this very long cultural continuum. But I don't know. I think all that pop culture stuff I came out of maybe it's somewhere in there too.
I'm sure it is. Yeah, and my advice would be let it poke its head in there. I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, what are we trying to do? Like as a not us, but like as a bigger group, is it just a reenactment? And that's why sometimes, yeah, like I've broken out of into more of like contemporizing stuff, or even just painting Mr. Incredible in a still life, because I'm like, yeah, Chardin didn't paint that, but I don't want to do a Dutch Romer glass all the time because I didn't even know what it was before, and I don't know anybody besides myself that owns a Romer glass, and the reason why I do it is because I love all that stuff. But that doesn't mean that I have to like go buy those same props and then narrow it down and put myself in a box and just paint the same things. To me, that's so boring. It's like I basically have like 20 things I can paint then. And if you get into like the symbolism in the Dutch, there's an article that was in the New York Times, and this I forget who wrote it, but he basically says messy table. Have you read this article? Did I send it to you?
No.
It's titled Messy Table, and we see a Dutch still life painting. But when you look at, that's what we see in the modern world. But when you go and you look at Dutch still life painting, they're all symbols. It's actually called a map of the world. That's the name of it. And every single element in there is a symbol connected to something. And it's just fascinating to me, is like, I feel like we're more towards like, oh, here's another messy table painting. What did the Dutch use? And then you go and you collect all these things. And I'm like, is that really all we're trying to do? We're just kind of reenacting, and then we're going back into the world and using our cell phones and Googling stuff and tinkering with AI. Do you think about that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of obvious that in my case, I like using the materials of the past. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm totally interested in the optical effects that you can create in painting that come from the Baroque, like glazing and scraping and like different strategies to get paint to do different things that are really they're foundationally related to like Dutch still life painting. But I want to do them with like pastel colors. Like, I want them to be very joyful and bright, and my paintings were heavy when I was young, and the more I paint, the more I want like lightness and celebration in them. And I don't know. It's like it's whatever motivates you at the end of the day. And I think if product is motivating you, people do very well with stuff like that. But I think it's harder to sustain long term. Like, my goals in painting are like, I want to be doing this when I'm 75, 80. I want to be in a totally different relationship with, and I want to love doing it then also. I don't want it to be like an albatross around my neck that is unfulfilling if I don't achieve certain things, or is marked to like some financial thing. It really is about the painting. That's the most exciting thing, I think.
Yeah. Well, look, man, we could talk about this stuff all day. I do think we should talk about that too. The idea that not now, But I think in the next one, hopefully the idea is that we're going to do a bunch of these that we're going to be short, but I don't think this one's all that short. It's about 55 minutes. But maybe we can talk about next time the idea of, like, I don't know, the entrepreneur idea and where we are with that as a culture. Like, I don't know. It seems to be like one of the things that kind of, I don't know if I should say get in the way, but forefront for the creative culture now, where we talk about ourselves as whatever CEOs or products or brands. I get brand all the time when we're talking about paintings, and I'm like, why does it have to be a brand? But I think it's a function of kind of where we are in 2024 with talking about this stuff. But let's wrap it up. Always fun talking to you. I always learn something. That's why I love talking to you. Anything you want to?
Sorry about the ship of Theseus thing. I couldn't help myself.
No, but that's what you just taught me, and now I'm gonna have to like go Google it. But that's great stuff, man.
No, I think it's a good idea. I mean, basically, if we periodically, like, we're always chatting about all these different ideas, and like we're dropping our kids off or picking them up or whatever, and squeezing in a phone call. We might as well record some of these, because I think there is some aspects of this is stuff I've talked about before, but some of it's bound to be valuable for people, and I just want to be like, I want to be helpful to people at the end of the day too. It's like, it's fun to talk shop and chat with people, but there's something different if people respond to this and they find value in it. That's a whole different level.
Totally, man. Well, we'll chat more, and we may do it monthly. Not sure yet, but we're still trying to figure it out. But Leo and I have these discussions all the time, and that's the point, is to kind of share them. Once him and I talk about things, and I'm like, dude, let's talk about that. So that's the plan. So
cool, man.
Dude, right, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, have a good day out there. Ciao.
All right, later, man.
Ciao.